Agatha Raisin and the Murder at Quince Cottage. Dear listeners, welcome to another mystery. I'm Sam, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you here for another captivating tale. Before we dive in, I'd love to hear a bit about you. What do you do, or what did you do for a living? Drop it in the comments. I always enjoy knowing more about our wonderful community. Now let's get cozy and start tonight's story. Chapter 1. The New Neighbour in Quince Cottage. The morning sunlight spilled gently over the roofs of Carsely, painting the Cotswold stone cottages with a soft, honeyed glow. Dew glistened on the hedgerows, and a mild breeze carried the mingled scents of lavender, damp earth, and Mrs. Bloxby's early baking. It was the sort of peaceful morning that made one believe nothing unexpected could ever happen here, until, of course, something did. Agatha Raisin, sharp-eyed and brisk even before her first cup of coffee, stood by her garden gate, arms folded, watching the moving van rumble to a stop outside Quince Cottage. The cottage had stood empty for months, its garden overgrown, its windows dark. Now 2 men in blue overalls were hauling boxes labelled books, fragile. Agatha tilted her head. "Books?" she murmured. "That's never a good sign. Means he'll be the serious sort. Probably wears slippers with tassels." Mrs. Bloxby appeared beside her, hands tucked into her cardigan pockets, her expression mild and amused. "Curiosity will be the death of you, Agatha." "Nonsense," Agatha replied. "Curiosity keeps the blood flowing. Who is he?" "The vicar says his name's Dr. Pemberton, retired historian. He bought the place outright, apparently." Agatha raised a brow. "A historian? What on earth would a historian want with Quince Cottage? There's hardly anything to write about here except how often Mrs. Cartwright burns her scones." Mrs. Bloxby smiled but said nothing. Her eyes flickered toward the cottage, thoughtful in a way that made Agatha's curiosity sharpen further. "You know something," Agatha accused lightly. "Only that the cottage has history," Mrs. Bloxby said at last. "But then, so do we all." She excused herself and drifted away toward the vicarage garden, leaving Agatha frowning after her. An hour later, Agatha could no longer resist. She straightened her jacket, adjusted her scarf, and marched up the lane toward Quince Cottage. The gravel crunched underfoot, and a blackbird scolded her from a nearby hedge, as though warning her off. She ignored it. The front door was open, and the faint smell of polish and old paper floated out. Inside, the new resident was directing movers with clipped precision. Dr. Pemberton was taller than she expected, with silver hair combed neatly back and an expression of calm intelligence. His eyes were pale grey, too pale, perhaps, and his voice held a deliberate gentleness that felt rehearsed. "Good morning," Agatha said brightly. "Welcome to Carsely. I'm Agatha Raisin from just up the lane." He turned, smiling politely. "Ah, Mrs. Raisin, yes, I've heard of you." Agatha paused, unsure whether to take that as compliment or warning. "All good things, I hope?" He chuckled softly. "Good or bad, they're always interesting. I do hope you won't mind the noise today. Moving into an old place can stir up dust and other things best left settled." "Other things?" she asked. "Oh, just memories," he said, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. "These cottages collect them like cobwebs." Agatha studied him closely. There was something about the way he spoke, too measured, too careful. He moved like a man with secrets carefully boxed up, just like the crates that now filled his hall. "Perhaps," she said, "but I always find that old places brighten up with the right company. You must come by for tea once you've unpacked." His eyes flicked toward her, unreadable. "How kind. I may take you up on. I enjoy company. In moderation." That faint pause between words, that polite chill beneath his smile, it set a small, delicious spark of intrigue flickering in Agatha's mind. She offered him one last nod and turned to leave, noting how his gaze followed her just a moment too long. That evening, as dusk settled over Carsely, Agatha sat by her sitting-room window with a cup of cocoa, pretending to read, but watching the outline of Quince Cottage across the lane. A single light glowed in the upper window, steady and soft. Then, just as she was about to turn away, Another shadow crossed the curtain, tall, deliberate, and distinctly not Dr. Pemberton's. Her cup paused mid-air. "Well," she murmured to her cat, "either he's got company already, or I've just found myself a new mystery." The cat blinked. Outside, the cottage light went out, leaving only the silver hush of moonlight over the village. A steady drizzle misted the village by mid-morning, softening the air and wrapping Carsely in the scent of rain and earth. Agatha Raisin had decided that the weather, though dreary to some, made an ideal backdrop for an impromptu invitation. After all, who could resist the offer of warmth and tea on a damp English afternoon? She arranged her sitting room with strategic care. The fire crackled merrily, the best china cups gleamed, and the plate of scones, bought not baked, sat discreetly on her grandmother's lace cloth. Satisfied, she took a quick glance in the mirror. Her lipstick was perfect, her hair suitably casual. Just as she adjusted a cushion for the fourth time, a sharp knock came at the door. "Dr. Pemberton," she greeted with her most gracious smile. "Do come in out of the rain." He stepped inside, shaking droplets from his coat. "You are kind, Mrs. Raisin. I hope I'm not intruding." "Nonsense," Agatha said briskly. "No one intrudes where there's tea." She gestured him toward the fire. "Sugar? Milk? Neither, thank you. I like to taste things as they are." His pale eyes caught the firelight, and for a fleeting second, Agatha thought they seemed almost metallic. They spoke of simple things at first. The weather, the market, the trouble with keeping garden soil dry in spring. Agatha peppered the conversation with practiced charm, letting him speak freely, but her attention sharpened when he began to talk of the cottage itself. "It's older than most believe," he said, holding his cup delicately. 17th century. The orchard, even older. "There's a story that one of the early owners, a widow, planted it over her husband's grave after he vanished." Agatha laughed lightly. "Oh, the sort of tale villagers tell after too many brandies." "Perhaps," he smiled faintly. "Still, there's often a grain of truth in legend. Some call it a curse. They say anyone who disturbs the orchard's soil will suffer misfortune." "How very dramatic," Agatha said, topping up her tea. Inside, her curiosity flared. "And have you disturbed it yet?" He tilted his head. "Not yet. Though I did disturb something else, an old journal hidden behind a bookcase. Rather a clever place to conceal one's thoughts, don't you think?" Agatha's heart skipped. She kept her expression neutral, even amused. "Depends on the thoughts. Were they scandalous?" He chuckled softly. "Sadly, nothing so exciting. Only dates, weather notes, and the occasional name I can't place. Still, there's a certain intimacy to handwriting left behind." Agatha smiled, but her mind was already racing. Why mention the journal at all if it were trivial? She studied his face as he sipped his tea, noticing the faint line of tension near his jaw, as though he weighed each word before releasing it. "Do you believe in curses, Mrs. Raisin?" he asked suddenly. "I believe people make their own luck," she replied. "And I prefer making mine with a strong cup of tea." His smile deepened, polite but unreadable. When he rose to leave, she offered her umbrella, but he declined. "The rain suits me," he said, stepping into the mist. Agatha closed the door, thoughtful. She moved to clear the tray, then stopped. Near the doormat, muddy footprints smeared across the tile, larger than his and oddly shaped, almost like boots, with uneven soles. Her eyes flicked toward the window, where drizzle streaked the glass. The path outside was empty. For a long moment she stood perfectly still, the fire crackling softly behind her. Then she reached for her notebook and jotted a single line. Footprints. Someone else there before him? She underlined it twice, smiled faintly, and murmured to the empty room, "Well, Doctor, I believe the game's begun." Chapter 2. Gossip and Ghosts. The bell above the Carsely village shop door jingled brightly as Agatha Raisin stepped in, shaking rain from her umbrella. The scent of coffee, cinnamon, and fresh bread mingled with the faint mustiness of stacked magazines. Outside, the drizzle persisted. Inside, the air buzzed with soft chatter, exactly the sort of place where secrets ripened like fruit left on a sunny windowsill. Doris Simpson stood at the counter, recounting something in her usual dramatic whisper to Mrs. Jones, who leaned in with wide eyes. Agatha caught her name mentioned mid-sentence and immediately pretended to browse the pastry shelf. "I tell you—" "I saw it myself," Doris said, lowering her voice in a way that only made everyone else strain to listen. A light in the window of Quince Cottage, flickering about midnight. Not candlelight either, too steady. "And the doctor, he's not the type for reading by lamplight at that hour," Mrs. Jones tutted sympathetically. "Perhaps he couldn't sleep. Or perhaps," Doris said, eyes glinting, "he wasn't alone." At that, Agatha turned smoothly, a scone in hand. "Oh, do stop trying to frighten people, Doris. Next, you'll say it was the ghost of Charlotte Havisham come back for revenge." Doris pursed her lip. "Laugh all you like, Agatha Raisin, but that cottage has always had trouble. Strange noises, odd smell. And once, before you moved here, there was a disappearance." Agatha raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite herself. "A disappearance, was there? Funny how no one mentioned that when I bought my cottage." "That's because," Doris said, lowering her voice again, "it happened to the last historian who lived there. The very one who said he'd found something important. One day, poof, gone. Never heard from again?" Mrs. Bloxby, who had been quietly examining tins of tea nearby, turned toward them. "Really, Doris," she said gently, "you'll have the whole village in hysterics. People vanish for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes they simply move on," Doris sniffed. "And sometimes they don't." She folded her arms, clearly satisfied she'd made her point. Agatha handed her scone to Mrs. Jones with a thin smile. "I'll take 2 of those, please, and a few of those custard tarts. Strictly for research, of course." Mrs. Bloxby followed her to the counter, smiling softly. "Research into what exactly?" "Human nature," Agatha replied. "Nothing more revealing than how people gossip." Mrs. Bloxby's eyes held a flicker of amusement. "Just remember to be kind, Agatha. Curiosity can easily become cruelty when pointed the wrong way." Agatha's tone softened. "I'll keep that in mind. Though between us, I think Quince Cottage is about to get much more interesting." Outside, the rain had eased to a soft drizzle. Agatha walked home, arms full of pastries and thought. The notion of a haunted cottage amused her, but something about the story tugged at her mind. The strange footprints by her door, the journal Dr. Pemberton mentioned, the faintly evasive tone he used, each small detail seemed to whisper that all was not as ordinary as it appeared. That night, Carsely lay quiet under a thin mist. The cottages glowed with firelight, smoke curling gently from chimneys. Agatha sat by her window, a cup of cocoa steaming beside her, and gazed across at Quince Cottage. The upstairs curtains were drawn, the house dark. Then faintly, a light bloomed in one of the lower windows, steady, unwavering, like an electric lamp hidden behind thick glass. Agatha leaned forward, narrowing her eyes. It wasn't the soft flicker of a candle, nor the golden hue of a fireplace. It was colder, sharper, almost blue. She glanced at her clock, just past midnight. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the light dimmed and vanished, leaving only the outline of the cottage against the pale sky. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed once, long and low. Agatha whispered to herself, "So it begins again, does it?" And, though she smiled, there was a curious shiver down her spine. The village clock struck 11:30, its mellow chime floating over Carsely like a reminder that decent folk ought to be in bed. Agatha Raisin, however, was wide awake, sitting by her parlour window with her cat, Hodge, curled like a comma on the sill. The rain had stopped hours ago, leaving the night sharp and clear. Across the way, Quince Cottage stood quiet, its silhouette softened by mist. She told herself she was only stretching her legs when she slipped on her trench coat and stepped outside. But curiosity was a stronger motive than health. She needed, to see what Dr. Pemberton was up to at such ungodly hours. Her shoes clicked lightly along the damp lane. The air smelled of wet earth and chimney smoke, and her breath came out in little clouds. Carsely slept, its cottages shuttered and dark. Only the faint creak of a weather vane broke the silence. When she reached the bend near Quince Cottage, she slowed, pretending to adjust her scarf, though her eyes were fixed on the house ahead. The garden gate hung slightly ajar, swinging just enough to tap against the latch with a soft clack, clack, clack. That gate, she remembered, had been locked tight earlier in the day. Odd, she muttered. He's not the careless sort. She stepped closer, the gravel crunching faintly beneath her heels. From within the cottage came a thread of music, delicate and haunting, like something played on an old gramophone. A slow waltz, faint and fluttering, yet unmistakably there. Agatha tilted her head, straining to catch the tune. Something about it prickled at her memory, a melody from another time. Then movement. A shadow glided across the drawn curtains, a tall figure, deliberate, pausing near the window. She froze. The music stopped mid-note. Silence. Her heart thudded painfully. Ridiculous, she whispered. He's probably just stretching. Still, she took another cautious step toward the gate, unable to help herself. Without warning, every light inside the cottage snapped off. The darkness was total. Her breath caught, and for an instant she thought she heard something, a faint scraping, like a chair being dragged across a wooden floor. Then the sound of the front door latch clicking. Agatha's pulse leapt. She turned quickly, meaning to head back before she made a fool of herself, but her heels slipped on a patch of damp pebbles, sending a sharp crack echoing across the quiet lane. She steadied herself, muttering an unladylike word under her breath, and then a whisper, soft, unmistakable. "Agatha." She froze. The voice seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, threaded through the mist like smoke. It wasn't loud, but intimate, like someone leaning close to her ear. "Agatha." Her mouth went dry. She spun, peering into the shadows. No one. The hedgerows stood silent, the trees perfectly still. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. For a moment she considered marching right up to the cottage door and demanding an explanation, but common sense and a sudden realization that she was in slippers, not boots, stopped her. She turned and hurried back the way she'd come, half expecting the whisper to follow. When she reached her gate, she slammed it shut, heart hammering like a drum. Hodge was waiting on the porch, tail flicking as if unimpressed by her adventure. "Well," she said, locking the door behind her. That was ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous, but her hands trembled slightly as she poured herself a small brand. She sipped it, staring through the window at the dark shape of Quince Cottage. Someone had whispered her name. She was sure of it. As she set down her glass, a spark of determination replaced the chill in her veins. "All right," she said to Hodge. "If that house wants to play games, it's chosen the wrong woman." "Tomorrow I start digging," the cat yawned. Agatha smiled tightly. "Yes, yes, laugh all you like. But I will get to the bottom of it." Chapter 3. The Village Garden. Fate. The morning of the Carsely village garden. Fate dawned bright and butter-yellow, the kind of sunshine that made even Agatha Raisin's temper seem almost pleasant. The green behind the church was already alive with the comforting chaos of bunting, tables, and the scent of fresh scones. Children darted between stalls, women fussed over flower displays, and the brass band tuned with painful enthusiasm. Agatha adjusted the gingham cloth on her jam stall, standing back to admire her jars of Raisin's Raspberry Royale. It was all very homely, very British, and therefore, she decided, the perfect vantage point for keeping an eye on Dr. Pemberton. He'd arrived in his usual tweed and charm, strolling between stalls with a smile that disarmed half the village women. Even Mrs. Bloxby seemed to blush faintly when he complimented her sponge cake. Agatha, spoon in hand, made a small sound of disapproval. "Honestly," she muttered to Doris Simpson, who was setting out lemon curd beside her. "You'd think he invented manners," Doris chuckled. "You're just jealous he didn't buy your jam first." "Jealous? I've better things to do than flutter at retired historian," Agatha said, though her gaze followed him all the same. Dr. Pemberton paused at the raffle table, chatting amiably with the vicar. The top prize, Agatha knew, was a delicate silver locket said to have belonged to the first mistress of Quince Cottage, a trinket donated by one of the local collectors. As the afternoon wore on, laughter and chatter rose with the warmth. Children carried off prizes. Mrs. Bloxby's sponge won best in show, and Agatha managed to sell half her stock, mostly by cornering unsuspecting passers-by. It was all terribly cheerful until the raffle began, the vicar, clearing his throat, read from the folded slips. "And the winner of the grand prize, this lovely antique locket, is—" He squinted at the paper. "Dr. Jonathan Pemberton." Applause rippled through the crowd. Agatha folded her arms, lips pursed. "Of course," she murmured. "It would be him." Dr. Pemberton accepted the little box with mock modesty. "How extraordinary," he said, flashing that easy smile. "I never win anything, until now," said Mrs. Bloxby warmly. "It must be fate." Agatha's eyebrow twitched. "Fate indeed!" He opened the box carefully, holding the locket up so the silver glinted in the sun. It was oval, engraved with tiny scrolls, the sort of craftsmanship that belonged to a bygone century. As he unclasped it, something small slipped free, a folded piece of paper, or perhaps a photograph, fluttering to the grass. "Oh dear," he said, stooping to retrieve it. But Agatha was quicker. "Allow me," she said sweetly, scooping it up before he could. It was, as she'd thought, a photograph, old and yellowed. She handed it over, but not before her sharp eyes caught its contents. 3 figures. Dr. Pemberton stood on one side, younger but unmistakable. Beside him, another man, tall and broad, with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. And between them, a woman, her face violently scratched out with something sharp. Agatha's stomach did a small, peculiar twist. She'd seen that second man somewhere before, though for the life of her she couldn't place where. "Thank you," said Pemberton, pocketing the photos swiftly. His smile had cooled a fraction. "Just a bit of family history, I imagine." "Curious what people leave behind." "Quite," said Agatha. "Old houses tend to keep secrets." His gaze flicked to her. "Thoughtful. And sometimes, Mrs. Raisin, people prefer they stay that way." The words hung between them, polite and faintly menacing beneath the hum of village cheer. Then he smiled again, genial as ever, and turned away to admire the rose competition. Agatha watched him go, her mind ticking like a clock. Behind her, Doris whispered, "You all right, love? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Not a ghost," Agatha murmured. "Just a puzzle, and you know how I feel about puzzles." She glanced toward Quince Cottage, its distant roof peeking through the trees. The fate's laughter drifted around her, but her thoughts had already turned darker, sharper. Whatever that photograph meant, she'd find out. And this time, she promised herself, before anyone else got there first. The next afternoon, the air hung heavy with the scent of roses and rain. Agatha Raisin sat in Mrs. Bloxby's sitting room, a teacup balanced precariously on her knee, and her eyes gleaming with restrained mischief. Mrs. Bloxby poured another cup with her usual calm grace. "You were very popular at the fete, Agatha." "I heard your raspberry jam sold out." "Only because I bullied half the village into buying it," Agatha admitted. "But never mind the jam. You'll never guess who won the raffle." Mrs. Bloxby's soft smile suggested she already knew. "Dr. Pemberton, wasn't it?" Agatha leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Yes, and the oddest thing happened. When he opened the locket, a photograph fell out. He looked as if he'd swallowed a wasp." "Oh dear," murmured Mrs. Bloxby, setting down the teapot. "What sort of photograph?" "3 people. Himself, though younger, a man I could almost place, and a woman with her face scratched out. Rather viciously, too." Mrs. Bloxby's hand froze midway to the sugar bowl. For a heartbeat, she said nothing. Then carefully, "Scratched out, you say?" Agatha narrowed her eyes. "You know something. You always do that thing with your voice when you're sitting on a secret." The vicar's wife sighed. "I don't sit on secrets, Agatha. I simply—" "Don't encourage trouble. Trouble's already unpacked its suitcase," Agatha replied briskly. "What do you know about Quince Cottage's history?" Mrs. Bloxby hesitated, glancing toward the window where rain streaked down the glass. "It's only gossip, really." "Years ago, perhaps 10, no more, there was an academic who stayed there. A historian doing research into local families. I remember there was some unpleasantness. A woman from Oxford, I think, accused him of something unseemly. Nothing was ever proved, but—" She trailed off. "But?" Agatha prompted, the word sharp with interest. Mrs. Blocksby folded her hands in her lap. She disappeared shortly after. Moved abroad, they said. But I never believed it. The poor thing was frightened. And if I recall correctly, that historian's name was Pemberton. Agatha sat back, her mind humming. "Our new neighbour's a retired historian, isn't he?" "Yes," Mrs. Blocksby admitted quietly. "I'd hoped it was just coincidence." Agatha tapped a fingernail against her teacup. "Coincidence doesn't pay rent in Carsely. There's always something under the surface." Mrs. Blocksby's expression softened with worry. "Agatha, please. You know how these things spiral. Let the police handle anything serious." "Police?" Agatha gave a dismissive sniff. "They'd need a magnifying glass just to find their enthusiasm." Speaking of which, she reached into her handbag and pulled out her mobile. "I think I'll give young Bill Wong a ring." Mrs. Blocksby winced faintly. "Oh, Agatha." But Agatha was already dialing. "He owes me after the last fiasco," she said, grinning. The phone rang 3 times before Bill's familiar weary voice answered. "Agatha, please tell me this isn't about your neighbour." "It is, actually. Jonathan Pemberton, retired historian, suspiciously polite." "Ring any bells?" "None I'm at liberty to discuss," Bill said flatly. "So there is something." "I didn't say that, which means there is." She smiled smugly into the receiver. "Come on, Bill, off the record. Was he ever investigated for something?" There was a pause too long to be casual. "Agatha, listen, leave it alone. He's not breaking any laws. And if you start digging, you'll only stir up old mud." "Understand?" Agatha's smile didn't falter. "Of course, darling. I'm all about peace and quiet." "Right," he said, unconvinced. "Promise me, Agatha. Promise, promise." She hung up before he could press further. Mrs. Blocksby raised an eyebrow. "You didn't promise sincerely?" "Since when have I ever?" Agatha said, reaching for another biscuit. "If people didn't want me poking around, they shouldn't behave so mysteriously." The rain thickened outside, drumming softly against the glass. Mrs. Blocksby watched her friend with mild resignation and deep affection. "Do be careful, dear. Sometimes curiosity uncovers more than comfort." Agatha smiled over her teacup, eyes alight with determination. "Then let's hope it uncovers something interesting first." Chapter 4. Secrets in the Orchard. The following morning dawned damp and still, the kind of half-sunlight that gave the Cotswold hills a dreamlike shimmer. Agatha Raisin, wrapped in her raincoat and armed with a suspiciously large basket, told herself she was simply taking a walk. In truth, she was doing what she did best, snooping. Quince Cottage sat at the far end of the lane, its orchard sprawling untidily behind a crumbling stone wall. Apple, plum and pear trees tangled together in picturesque disarray. From Agatha's garden she'd seen Dr. Pemberton out there often, pruning or digging with the patience of a man hiding something. She climbed the small stile between their properties, muttering, "If anyone asks, I'm looking for my cat." "Never mind, I haven't got one." The orchard smelled of damp earth and green sweetness. Agatha stepped carefully, heels sinking into the soft ground. Birds chattered overhead as she scanned the grass for anything out of place. Her instincts prickled. Something here didn't fit. It didn't take long to find it. Near the oldest pear tree, the soil had been recently disturbed, darker and looser than the rest. Someone had clearly dug there, and not for planting. A square of earth, roughly 2 feet across, looked hastily filled. Agatha crouched, balancing on her haunches, heart ticking faster. "Well, well," she murmured. "What have you been up to, Doctor?" She prodded the patch gently with a stick, then frowned as something pale caught her eye, a scrap of fabric half buried at the edge. Tugging it free, she realized it was an old gardening glove, the kind with embroidery along the wrist. Mud had stiffened it, but faint letters could still be made out. E.P. Agatha turned it over in her hand, breath quickening. E.P., the same initials as the woman in that locket photo, the one whose face had been violently scratched away. Coincidence? Hardly. Her pulse drummed as she whispered, "Eliza." Pemberton. The name fit almost too neatly. For a moment she stood very still, listening to the quiet orchard hum. The breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the faint perfume of blossoms, and then, under it, A soft crunch of footsteps. Agatha froze. Someone was behind her, admiring the trees, Mrs. Raisin. She spun around, nearly dropping the glove. Dr. Pemberton stood a few yards away, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, his expression mild.
"They've always been my favourite," he said conversation.
"Pear trees, I mean. So generous in their yield." Agatha's throat felt dry.
"Oh, yes, quite. I was just
taking a little stroll. Lovely spot you have here." "Indeed." His gaze drifted briefly to the basket she clutched, then to the disturbed soil. "Exploring the orchard, are we?"
"Only a little," she said, forcing a laugh.
"I've always loved old gardens. So much character, I agree," he said softly, stepping closer. His tone was friendly, but his eyes, those calm, scholarly eyes, did not match the smile.
"Character and memory. I sometimes think the ground remembers what we try to forget." Agatha's fingers tightened around the glove inside her pocket. "How poetic," she managed.
"Most people just say the weeds come back." He chuckled lightly. "You have a sharp wit, Mrs. Raisin. I hope you'll forgive me if I ask that you be careful near the trees. The roots are delicate."
"Easily disturbed, of course," she said, meeting his gaze squarely.
"Wouldn't want to damage anything valuable." For a heartbeat, neither moved. The air felt heavier somehow, charged. Then he smiled again. Pleasant, civilized, perfectly ordinary. "Good day to you, Mrs. Raisin," he said, turning back toward the cottage. Agatha watched him go, her pulse thudding in her ears. The moment he vanished inside, she exhaled.
"Delicate roots, my foot," she muttered.
"He's hiding something, and I intend to find out what." She slipped the glove into her coat pocket, casting one last glance at the dark patch of soil. The breeze stirred, whispering through the leaves, and for the first time, Agatha felt a shiver of genuine unease. Whatever secrets Quince Cottage held, they were buried close to the roots, and they were not quite ready to stay hidden. Dr. Pemberton's invitation came the next afternoon, slipped neatly through Agatha's letterbox on heavy cream paper. Tea at Quince Cottage to clear up any misunderstandings. Agatha stood in her hallway reading it twice. "Misunderstandings," she muttered. "He means he caught me snooping." Still, curiosity outshone caution. By 4 o'clock, she was walking up his garden path, pretending to admire the flowers instead of rehearsing excuses. He opened the door before she knocked, as though he'd been waiting. "Mrs. Raisin," he said smoothly, "how kind of you to accept." "Do come in." Inside, Quince Cottage looked almost picturesque. Low beams, polished wood, a faint scent of polish and something else. Metallic, sharp, and unpleasantly sweet.
Agatha wrinkled her nose.
"Lovely place," she said brightly, eyes roving. The sitting room held old maps, heavy books, and a collection of antique photographs, many of stern-faced women whose eyes seemed to follow her. "Do sit," he said, gesturing to a chair near the hearth. The fire crackled lazily, though it was hardly cold. On the mantel stood the silver locket, gleaming in the flickering light. He poured tea from a delicate china pot. Milk, just a splash. Agatha watched him carefully, noting the precision of his movements, the quiet intensity behind his small smile. "So," she said, "you've settled in nicely. The orchard's looking quite
lively." He gave no sign of surprise. "I do enjoy gardening," he said.
"It's rather like history, don't you think? One must dig through layers to find what's buried." Agatha smiled thinly. "I prefer to let things stay where they belong." He stirred his tea, gaze distant. "If only everyone felt that way." "You see, Mrs. Raisin, people have long memories in these villages.
Old feuds, forgotten loves.
They rot quietly beneath the surface until someone stirs the soil." Agatha took a careful sip, heart ticking faster. "Sounds almost personal. Perhaps it is." He set down his cup and leaned back, eyes on the fire. "Once there was a man and a woman who thought they could rewrite their story. But the past doesn't appreciate edits. It always finds its way back." The words sent a faint shiver through her. She forced a laugh. "You make it sound rather tragic for an afternoon chat." He smiled without warmth.
"History is always tragic, Mrs. Raisin. Haven't you noticed?"
For a moment the only sound was the pop of the fire. That metallic tang grew stronger, like iron or old blood. Agatha shifted in her chair, glancing toward the hearth where a thin, dark stain marked the edge of the stone. She opened her mouth, then thought better of it. I should be going, she said briskly, setting down her cup.
Thank you for tea. He rose and escorted her to the door.
A pleasure. Do visit again. After all, he added, his voice soft but deliberate, history has a way of repeating itself. Agatha paused on the threshold, the afternoon sunlight suddenly feeling cold. Not if I can help it, she said, forcing a smile. As the door closed behind her, she drew a steadying breath. Her heart was thumping, her curiosity burning. Whatever Dr. Pemberton meant by repeating history, she intended to find out before she became part of it. Chapter 5. The Murder at Quince Cottage. Agatha Raisin had just poured her morning coffee when a frantic knock rattled her front door. She nearly spilled the cup.
Who on earth? She muttered, marching to answer it. Mrs. Bloxby stood on the step, cheeks pale beneath her neatly pinned hair. Agatha, she gasped, something dreadful's happened.
It's Dr. Pemberton. He's been found dead. For a heartbeat, Agatha simply blinked.
Dead? Nonsense. I saw him yesterday afternoon. Mrs. Bloxby shook her head.
The milkman noticed his front door ajar this morning. The police are there now. Agatha didn't even bother with her coat. Come on, she said, grabbing her handbag as if it were armour. The lane outside shimmered with early light, dew glittering on hedges, the air thick with birdsong that felt almost mocking. A small crowd had gathered outside Quince Cottage, villagers in dressing gowns whispering behind hands. The sight of police tape cutting across the gate gave the scene a surreal chill. Bill Wong looked up as Agatha pushed her way through.
Agatha, you shouldn't be here, he said, though his expression softened at the sight of her. Don't be ridiculous, she snapped.
You think I'd sit at home knitting when my neighbour's been murdered? Bill exhaled. We don't know that yet. The doctor's confirming details. Agatha brushed past him and peered into the doorway. The smell hit first. Tea, dust, and something faintly chemical. The sitting room was chaos, papers scattered across the carpet, a chair overturned, one window open to the breeze. Dr. Pemberton lay slumped over his writing desk, his head tilted unnaturally to the side. Agatha's stomach twisted, but she forced herself to look closer.
Poison?
She asked quietly. Bill hesitated. Possibly. There's a teacup beside him, shattered. The residue smells.
Wrong. She crouched slightly, eyes narrowing at the cup's remains.
The fine china was the same she'd drunk from 2 days ago.
I told you, she murmured. Tea can be lethal in the wrong hand. Bill shot her a look. Agatha, don't start theorizing.
We'll know more once forensics finish, but Agatha's attention was already elsewhere. The desk drawers were half open, and on one corner sat a clean rectangle of dust where something had recently been removed. The journal, she said softly.
It's gone. What journal?
He mentioned it at tea, a hidden one he'd found in the cottage. Said it contained family secrets. Her tone sharpened. And now it's vanished. Bill straightened, rubbing the back of his neck. We can't jump to conclusions. You mean you can't say them? Agatha retorted. But you're thinking it too, he sighed. All I'm saying is it's too soon to call it murder. Could have been accidental. Accidental? She arched an eyebrow. People don't accidentally poison themselves during afternoon tea, Bill. Not unless they're remarkably unlucky or remarkably guilty. He didn't answer. His silence said enough. Mrs. Bloxby lingered near the doorway, her voice small.
Poor man. He seemed so self-contained. Self-contained people always have the best secrets, Agatha said grimly.
Her gaze drifted to the window. The garden beyond shimmered in the sun, peaceful and deceitful. She could just make out the pear tree through the glass, its leaves swaying gently, as though whispering over what lay beneath. Bill's radio crackled. Detective Wong, the coroner's ready. He gave Agatha a weary look.
Promise me you'll let us handle this. I'll consider it, she said sweetly. As he walked away, she turned once more toward the body.
A glint of silver caught her eye, the locket still resting on the mantel, its chain twisted, one hinge broken. Agatha's mind raced. The missing journal, the poison tea, the woman with the scratched-out face, all threads leading somewhere dark and deliberate. And as the wind rustled through the orchard beyond, she couldn't shake the feeling that Dr. Pemberton's past had finally caught up with him, and that the story wasn't finished yet. Carsely had not seen such excitement since the vicar's wife once mistook a visiting actor for a burglar. By midday, gossip about Dr. Pemberton's death had spread faster than jam on a scone. Every shop, lane, and post office queue buzzed with theories. Agatha Raisin, meanwhile, stood at her garden gate with a notebook in hand, pen poised like a weapon. "If Bill won't share facts," she muttered, "I'll find them myself." Her first stop was the bakery. Naturally, the village's most reliable source of flaky pastries and scandal. Doris Simpson, her cleaner and self-appointed intelligence officer, was already there, leaning conspiratorially across the counter. "Morning, Doris," Agatha said, breezing in. "I trust you've heard." Doris lowered her voice. "Heard? My dear, the whole street's in mourning, or pretending to be."
"You'll never guess what I saw last night." Agatha's eyes sharpened.
"Go on." "I couldn't sleep. Around midnight I got up for some cocoa and looked out the window. There was someone walking away from Quince Cottage, hooded coat, moving fast. Looked like a woman, but I can't swear to it." Agatha's pulse quickened.
"And you didn't think to mention this sooner?"
Doris sniffed.
"I didn't fancy being accused of spying, did I?"
"The police scare me half to death." "Well, they don't scare me," Agatha said briskly.
"Did you see which way they went?"
"Toward the orchard path." Doris hesitated. "Could have been Mrs. Bloxby, maybe. She has that same beige coat." Agatha froze mid-note. "Mrs. Bloxby?" "Don't be absurd. I said could," Doris replied defensively. It was dark. Still the image lodged itself in Agatha's mind. Mrs. Bloxby, gentle as a lamb, creeping through the orchard at midnight. Impossible. Yet the woman had been oddly subdued this morning, almost haunted. By the time Agatha reached the vicarage, her curiosity was boiling over. Mrs. Bloxby answered the door with a strained smile. "Agatha, dear," she said softly. "I hoped you'd come." "I'm worried about you," Agatha said. "You seem—"
"Off," Mrs. Bloxby hesitated.
"It's just been such a shock. Dr. Pemberton was part of the parish after all. I helped him with a few archival papers." "Archival papers?"
Agatha pounced.
"What sort?" "Oh, old property documents, letters. He was researching the cottage's history." Agatha felt her skin prickle. "Did one of them happen to be a journal?" The vicar's wife's eyes flickered just for a second before she turned to pour tea. "I may have seen something like that." "But it's gone missing now." "Missing," Agatha repeated.
"How convenient." Mrs. Bloxby's voice trembled faintly. "Agatha, please."
"Don't start another crusade. Let the police handle it." Agatha leaned back, lips pursed. "My dear, the last time I let the police handle it, they nearly arrested the vicar for stealing his own collection plates." Mrs. Bloxby winced. "Point taken." Leaving the vicarage, Agatha flipped open her notebook and drew a firm line down the middle of the page. At the top she wrote, "Who had reason to poison Dr. Pemberton?" Under motive, she listed 3 neat columns. Money? The cottage, perhaps? He'd mentioned an inheritance.
Revenge, that scratched-out photograph whispered of grudges. Jealousy, always the most unpredictable spark. Then came the name, Mrs. Bloxby.
Doris Simpson, Mr. Jessup the antiques dealer. Colonel Lacey, if he's still sulking about losing the raffle. She ticked each thoughtfully. "Everyone's capable of murder when provoked," she murmured. "Even the godly." At that moment, her eye caught something odd through the window of the charity shop opposite. On a shelf by the door, propped casually between romance novels and church cookbooks, sat a small, leather-bound journal. Her heart jolted. The same embossed corner, the same frayed strap. "Well," she whispered, tucking her notebook away, "it seems history isn't done repeating itself after all." And with that, Agatha strode across the lane, ready to claim her next clue before anyone else could notice it was there. Chapter 6. Clues and Confession. Bill Wong looked as though he hadn't slept. When Agatha opened her front door to find him on her step, cap in hand and expression grim, she knew he wasn't there for pleasantries. "Morning, Bill," she said briskly.
"Come to arrest me already?"
He sighed. "Don't joke, Agatha."
"This is serious." She ushered him inside, half irritated, half intrigued. "Tea? No time. I shouldn't even be here." He closed the door and lowered his voice.
"You're mentioned in Dr. Pemberton's notes," Agatha blinked. "What notes?" "The ones we found in his desk drawer, the parts that weren't torn out. There's a list of names and questions. Yours was underlined twice. Twice? Agatha straightened, pride flaring before reason caught up.
Underline for what reason?
Bill rubbed the back of his neck.
That's what worries me.
Most of the names are crossed off. Local people, historians, one or two from Oxford. But yours, he left untouched, underlined, as if you were next. Agatha tried to laugh, but it came out too high. Next for tea, perhaps. The man adored my baking. Bill gave her a long look.
Agatha, please. I'm not saying you're in danger, but if he was digging into something before he died, it might have involved you more than you realize. Oh, don't be melodramatic, she said, though her fingers tightened on the teapot.
What exactly was he investigating? An old theft case, Bill replied, from decades ago. A museum piece went missing, a silver bracelet from the Carsely Historical Trust collection. It was never recovered. Agatha's brow furrowed. And what's that to do with me?
Nothing, I hope.
But the accused woman's initials were E.P., same as those on that glove you found. Agatha froze. E.P.
Eleanor Pemberton, Bill nodded grimly. His wife, or ex-wife.
Depends which records you read. He was trying to clear his name or hers. Hard to tell which. Agatha set her cup down, her curiosity igniting like a struck match. So he moves into Quince Cottage, the very place tied to their past, digs up old memories, and then dies before finishing his work. Tell me that's coincidence. Bill's expression said it wasn't. I came here to warn you, not to encourage you. Then you should have known better, she said crisply. You can't dangle a mystery like that in front of me and expect me to knit instead. Agatha, he said, exasperated, promise me you'll stay out of it. The chief's already watching you. He thinks you'll interfere again. I never interfere, she said indignantly. I assist.
It's not my fault if the police can't connect the dots without my help, Bill groaned. You're impossible, she gave him a sweet smile.
That's why you like me. He ignored that, glancing toward the window. Look, I've said too much already. Just be careful. If Pemberton was onto something dangerous, someone else might still be involved. But as soon as he left, Agatha was already reaching for her coat. She headed straight to the charity shop, where she'd spotted the mysterious journal. To her dismay, the shelf was empty. The clerk looked up.
Oh, that old thing? Sold it this morning? Sold it? Agatha's pulse quickened.
To whom?
Didn't catch the name.
Nice woman, though. Said she was doing research for the parish. Agatha's mind spun. Mrs. Bloxby. Thank you, she said tightly, marching out into the lane. Bill's warning echoed in her head, her name underlined, the missing journal, the initials on the glove, and yet all she could think was, if I'm in his notes, then I'm part of the story now. And Agatha Raisin never walked away from a story unfinished. Doris Simpson was not known for subtlety. Her curtains, patterned with red roses the size of saucers, practically shouted across the lane. When Agatha knocked that afternoon, Doris's face appeared in the window first, watchful, wary. Oh, it's you, she said, opening the door.
I thought it was one of those reporters again. Agatha stepped inside, feigning cheerfulness.
Reporters? Really, Doris, you've become quite the celebrity.
I only came for tea, Doris.
Then mind you drink it. I've had enough people poking about my kitchen lately. The table was neatly set, 2 chipped cups, a fruitcake, and a pot that smelled faintly of overboiled leaves. Agatha sat, smiling her most innocent smile. Doris, dear, I was hoping to ask you something rather small. That's what you said before the parish council meeting, Doris muttered. Do you remember the gardening glove I found near the orchard? Embroidered initials, E.P. For a moment Doris's hand froze on the teapot. Then she poured, eyes fixed on the cup.
Can't say I do. Oh, come now, Agatha said lightly.
You've been in that cottage before, haven't you? You told me you worked there once. Doris's jaw tightened. Years ago? When old Mrs. Ellison owned it, before her niece took over. There was nothing strange about it then, but her niece, Eleanor Pemberton, she's the one with those initials, isn't she? The colour drained slightly from Doris's cheeks.
I don't know what you're talking about. Agatha leaned forward, voice softening.
Doris, if you know something about that family, it could help clear up what happened. You're not in trouble. Doris's eyes darted toward the window, then back again.
You think I don't remember the night they argued? The shouting. I was scrubbing the kitchen floor.
He told her she'd ruined him. She said he'd pay for what he'd done. Agatha's pulse quickened. Who, Doris? Dr. Pemberton and his wife? Doris clutched her cup, knuckles white. You don't understand, Agatha. Some things are better left where they're buried. Buried?
Agatha repeated. You mean in the orchard?
The teacup rattled as Doris slammed it down.
He deserved it,
she burst out, eyes flashing.
After what he did to her. To all of us.
A tense silence followed.
Agatha's heart thudded.
She didn't dare move. Doris breathed heavily, staring at her hands. I shouldn't have said that, she whispered. Forget it. Agatha sat back slowly.
I don't think I can. Doris rose abruptly, wiping her hands on her apron.
Tea's gone cold. Best you leave now, Agatha, please. Outside, the afternoon sun had turned pale and thin.
Agatha stood on the path, unsettled.
Doris's outburst echoed in her ears. He deserved it. Whatever had happened in Quince Cottage years ago hadn't stayed buried after all. And now, it seemed, half the village was tangled in its roots. Agatha tightened her scarf and whispered to herself, so much for a quiet retirement. Chapter 7. The Hidden Journal. It took Agatha 2 full days to decide she wasn't technically breaking and entering. After all, the police had already finished their sweep, and Quince Cottage stood empty now, its gate hanging loosely, like a mouth half open in surprise. Just checking for loose ends, she murmured, as she let herself in through the back door with a hairpin and considerable satisfaction. Inside, the air was still and faintly musty. The cottage seemed smaller without its owner's presence, shadows thickening in corners where light dared not linger. The teapot still sat by the hearth, its cracked handle a grim reminder of the last cup Dr. Pemberton ever poured. Agatha pulled on gloves and began her inspection. If I were a pompous historian hiding secrets, she muttered, where would I keep them? Her eyes roved over the bookshelves, tall and crammed with dusty tomes, local histories, parish registers, even a few titles in Latin. She tugged one volume out. It came free too easily. Behind it the faintest draught whispered. Hush, she said triumphantly. A small panel at the back shifted when she pressed it. With a little push, it clicked open, revealing a narrow cavity, and inside, a slim, leather-bound journal. Agatha's heart gave a delighted thump. She carried it to the table, brushing away dust. The handwriting was neat, precise, almost beautiful in its control. March 3rd. My research into Charlotte Havisham continues. The villagers still whisper her name, half in pity, half in fear. They say she cursed the orchard after her husband's betrayal. Such nonsense, but perhaps truth lies beneath superstition. Agatha turned the pages carefully. Each entry seemed to shift between fascination and obsession. Pemberton wrote of Charlotte as if she were both subject and ghost. March 10th, she was wronged. They all said she was mad, but I see now what she meant by retribution. The orchard holds more than fruit, it holds memory.
I will find what she buried, Agatha. He really was off his trolley. Still, her pulse quickened.
She flipped further ahead. April 2nd, the initials in the glove, hers.
I am certain of it.
Doris still remembers, though she pretends not to.
I must speak with her again, but carefully. Agatha's breath caught.
Doris again. So Pemberton had connected her to the mystery long before his death. The final pages grew increasingly erratic, the once elegant script tightening into hurried scratches. April 7th. The truth is close. I can feel her in the walls, in the soil. Tonight I dig beneath the pear tree. Charlotte will not haunt me once I've freed her secret. The last entry, half finished and abruptly scrawled, made Agatha's skin prickle. She will never tell. No signature, no date, just those 4 words. She ran her finger along the edge of the page and froze. A faint smudge marked the corner, darker than dust, shaped almost like a fingerprint. Someone else had handled it after him. Agatha closed the book slowly, her mind racing.
So you found something, didn't you, Dr. Pemberton?
And someone made sure you'd never talk about it. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the shutters, making her jump. She tucked the journal into her bag and replaced the panel just as the sound of footsteps echoed faintly from the lane. Heart pounding, she slipped out the back, closing the door softly behind her. The village looked perfectly peaceful in the late afternoon light, smoke curling from chimneys, children playing by the green. But as Agatha hurried home, She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching, waiting for her to turn one page too many. The vicarage kitchen smelled of lemon polish and freshly baked scones, as it always did when Mrs. Blocksby was nervous. Agatha sat at the small table, her bag resting on her knees, the recovered journal hidden inside like contraband. Mrs. Blocksby poured tea with unsteady hand. "You found something, haven't you?" she said quietly. "I could tell by the way you came up the path." Agatha hesitated. "Found, yes."
"Understood. Not yet. But I think you can help me with that." The vicar's wife looked weary, older some.
"I was hoping this would all stay buried." "Too late for that," Agatha said softly. "Tell me about Charlotte Havisham." Mrs. Blocksby's hand trembled as she set down her cup. Charlotte came to Carsely in 1953. She was young, clever, and far too beautiful for her own good. She married Edward Havisham, who owned Quince Cottage then.
People said they were happy, but...
Well, you know how villages are. The gossip was constant. Agatha nodded, saying nothing. "One day," Mrs. Blocksby continued, "Edward was found dead in the orchard. Poisoned wine, they said. Charlotte swore she was innocent, but everyone believed otherwise. She vanished before the inquest. The police never found her. Some said she fled abroad. Others, she trailed off. Others said she haunted the place." Agatha finished for her. Mrs. Blocksby gave a small, sad smile. "Yes, Dr. Pemberton believed that too, though not in the supernatural sense. He was a historian, but he was also—"
"In love with her." Agatha's eyebrows rose.
"With Charlotte? Oh, yes. He was a young scholar then, researching local families. He and Charlotte exchanged letters.
"I saw one once when I helped her with church records."
She wrote that she'd made a mistake, that she feared for her life. When Edward died, Pemberton refused to believe she'd done it. He said she was framed." Agatha reached into her bag and drew out the locket, placing it between them. "Then this must be them." Mrs. Blocksby's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, that's Edward on the left, Pemberton in the middle, and Charlotte on the right. He kept that photo with him for decades. When she disappeared, it broke something in him. His research wasn't just about history, it was penance." "Penance for what?" "For not saving her," Mrs. Blocksby's voice quavered. "He returned to the village years later, convinced the truth was still here. He believed someone else poisoned Edward, and that the same person silenced Charlotte." Agatha frowned. "So he started digging, literally and figuratively."
"And ended up dead himself. You knew all this and said nothing."
Mrs. Blocksby lowered her gaze. "I didn't think it mattered anymore. I told myself it was all too far in the past. But when Dr. Pemberton moved into that cottage,
I felt it all rising again.
the same unease."
The same whispers." Agatha leaned back, her mind racing.
"You realize what this means, don't you? Someone in this village has kept a murderer's secret for over 50 years. Perhaps," Mrs. Blocksby said softly, "or perhaps the truth simply became too painful to face." Agatha's tone softened. "You feel guilty, don't you?" Mrs. Blocksby's eyes glistened. "We all do in our way. Charlotte was kind to me when I first came here."
"I should have spoken up when the rumours began."
But silence was easier. For a long moment neither woman spoke. The clock ticked gently above the mantel. Finally, Agatha said, "History repeating itself, that's what he meant?" Mrs. Blocksby looked at her gravely. "Yes, and you, my dear Agatha, may be standing in Charlotte's place without even realizing it." The words lingered like the fading scent of lemon polish, chilling Agatha more than she cared to admit. Chapter 8. The Final Reveal at the Fete Hall. The Carsely Village Hall smelled of lavender polish, sponge cake, and anticipation. Folding chairs creaked as neighbours shuffled in, whispering eagerly. Agatha Raisin stood at the front, chin lifted, arms crossed in satisfaction. Beside her, Bill Wong looked as if he'd rather be anywhere else. "Honestly, Agatha," he murmured, "this isn't procedure." "Oh, don't fuss," she replied. "You'll thank me once it's all tidy and solved. Besides, everyone loves a good story before supper." She turned to face the expectant crowd. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice."
"I thought it best we clear the air about recent unpleasantness." A ripple of murmurs spread across the room.
"Now," she continued, voice smooth, "let's begin where all good stories do, at Quince Cottage." Every villager leaned in slightly.
Agatha's voice carried the lilt of an entertainer, each word polished.
"Our late Dr. Pemberton arrived, claiming to be a historian. And indeed he was. But he wasn't here merely to research the past. He was here to resurrect it. His connection to Charlotte Havisham, the cottage's most infamous resident, was personal. Bill coughed quietly, but Agatha pressed on. He believed Charlotte was wrongly accused of murdering her husband. He returned to find the real culprit. But as fate would have it, he discovered more than he bargained for. She paused to let that sink in. The air felt tight with expectation. Now, the night before his death, Dr. Pemberton unearthed something in the orchard, something buried near the pear tree. He mentioned it in his journal. She held up a worn notebook. A collective gasp fluttered across the hall. And I believe what he found was evidence connecting Charlotte's tragedy to one of us here tonight. Doris Simpson, sitting near the end of the second row, shifted uncomfortably. Agatha's gaze flicked toward her, just for a heartbeat, but enough for several villagers to notice. Someone, Agatha went on, had a reason to keep Charlotte's name in the dark. Someone who lived here then, and still does. Someone who knew Dr. Pemberton's digging, both literal and figurative, would uncover the truth. She took a leisurely step forward. Now what could that truth be? Perhaps that Charlotte Havisham didn't poison her husband. Perhaps another hand poured the wine.
A hand that once worked in her house. Doris's teacup clattered to the floor, shattering.
All eyes turned. Careful, Doris, Agatha said mildly. Nerves, dear?
It's these old hands, Doris stammered.
Nothing more. Agatha's tone was deceptively kind.
Oh, of course.
It must be dreadful keeping such a heavy secret for so long. Bill shifted uncomfortably.
Agatha, she ignored him.
You see, Doris once worked for the Havishams. She heard their quarrels, saw the letters Charlotte received from her admirer, Dr. Pemberton. When Edward found out, he planned to throw his wife out penniless. Doris, loyal as ever, took matters into her own hands. The room was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. Agatha's voice softened, almost sympathetic. You poisoned Edward's wine to protect Charlotte. But when Pemberton came back years later digging up ghosts, you panicked. You met him that night to beg him to stop.
And when he wouldn't?
Her eyes locked with Doris's trembling one. You poured him another cup of tea. Doris's breath came in ragged bursts. You can't prove that. No, Agatha admitted, but the journal can. There's a fingerprint on the last page, the same hand that baked the vicar's biscuits for 30 years. Bill stepped forward, expression grave. Doris Simpson, I think we'd best continue this down at the station. The crowd erupted in whispers as Doris slumped, eyes glistening. It wasn't supposed to happen twice, she whispered.
He just wouldn't stop digging. Agatha exhaled slowly.
The hall felt both lighter and sadder. And that, she said, is the danger of digging too deep into the past. Rain began to fall before the village hall had quite emptied. The crowd, buzzing with shock and sympathy, drifted out beneath umbrellas, voices low and astonished. Inside, Bill Wong was speaking quietly to Doris, his tone gentle but firm. Agatha lingered near the front, feeling both weary and strangely exhilarated. Doris's shoulders sagged under the weight of years. It wasn't murder, she murmured, eyes glistening. Not the first time. Edward Havisham was cruel. Charlotte was desperate. I only meant to make him ill, to scare him. But the dose was too strong. Her voice cracked.
She never forgave me.
And when she disappeared, I buried the truth with her. Bill nodded grimly, jotting notes.
And when Dr. Pemberton returned?
Doris gave a hollow laugh. He said he wanted justice for Charlotte. But what he really wanted was to clear his conscience. He'd loved her once.
I begged him to leave it alone.
When he wouldn't, She broke off, eyes brimming. I just did what I always do.
Made tea. The silence was heavy but not cruel. Agatha, standing a few steps away, felt a pang, not of triumph, but of understanding.
Life in Carsely had a way of hiding tragedies beneath scones and small talk. Bill cleared his throat softly. We'll take you quietly, Doris. No need for a scene. Doris nodded. I've lived with this long enough. Maybe now I can sleep. As Bill led her out into the rain, Agatha watched through the window. The street lamps cast soft halos over the puddled road. For a long moment she simply stood there, arms folded, the echoes of the night still humming in her mind. By morning, the village had already begun to right itself. Mrs. Blocksby visited with a basket of jam tarts for strength, while Roy Silver called to declare the whole thing positively cinematic. Agatha, in her kitchen, rolled her eyes and reached for the kettle. When Bill dropped by later, damp from the drizzle, she had already set 2 cups out. "You look knackered," she observed.
"Milk, no sugar?"
"Please," he sighed, sitting heavily. "You know, Agatha, you've a real knack for inserting yourself into police work." She smiled sweetly. "And yet you always turn up for tea afterward." "Must be my charm," he snorted. "Charm's not the word I'd use." "Then it must be the jam," she said, pushing the plate toward him. Mrs. Blocksby made it. "I assure you it's non-lethal." For a moment they just sat in companionable quiet. The rain pattered softly against the window, the cottage filled with the faint scent of bergamot and sugar. Bill leaned back with a sigh. "You know, you could take up gardening or knitting like a normal person." Agatha grinned. "And miss out on all this excitement?"
"Hardly," he chuckled, shaking.
"One day you're going to get yourself into real trouble." "My dear Bill," she said, lifting her cup. "That's what keeps life interesting." Outside, the rain thickened, wrapping the village in a silvery haze. Somewhere in the distance the church bell tolled softly. Agatha gazed out at the drenched roses by her window and thought of Charlotte Havisham, of secrets buried and stories unearthed too late. Then, with a brisk little shrug, she turned back to the warmth of her tea. "Well," she murmured to herself, "another mystery solved. Though I dare say by next week someone will misplace their cat or lose a brooch, and the piece will be shattered all over again." She smiled, a faint, amused curve of satisfaction. And thank heavens for that. The rain continued its gentle drumming, steady and soothing. In the cosy glow of her cottage, Agatha Raisin leaned back in her chair, sipped the last of her tea, and let the world be quiet, for now.